Hey guys, what's up? I'm Erin and welcome back to the channel. Interest rates on savings accounts is pretty stagnant and it looks like we're part of the problem. Specifically, I'm part of the problem. Last Friday, I released this video talking about elevated levels of cash that many of us are keeping on hand. And specifically in it, when I started talking about high yield savings accounts, I said this. And I have to say, while I am a huge fan of high yield savings accounts, I'm not the person who's out there constantly switching accounts just chasing that higher yield. If the one I'm sitting in, for example, is paying 2.5% and I know there's one out there that pays 3%, I'm not gonna change accounts. I'm gonna stay right where I am. I look at the whole process of opening a new account and transferring the money as more of a hassle than that $50 is actually worth. So I think it's just simple to pick a high yield savings account you like and stay put. Oh man, that's the problem, or at least part of it, and I hate being part of the problem. Simply just doing what's convenient, not fighting for a higher rate of return, and just accepting a less than stellar rate of return. Turns out that's what most people do. Most people know that they could earn a higher interest rate by simply switching their savings accounts, but most people don't do that. You know how many people actually shop around and actually make the switch for their savings accounts when they find one paying higher interest? 3.5% of people. Even worse, of American adults who have savings accounts, only 21% of them are using high yield savings accounts. The average interest rate on a traditional savings account is currently 0.14%. The national average on a high yield savings account, 2.7%, and some are even paying all the way up to 3.5%. So at the very least, you should be utilizing a high yield savings account. Since roughly this time last year, inflation has gone from 5% to highs of 9% and currently sits a little bit over 8%. In response, the Fed has increased interest rates 5 times this year. Mortgage rates have responded by more than doubling, going from 3% to over 6%. But our savings accounts haven't really adjusted. One of the only silver linings in a rising interest rate environment is that savers are supposed to be rewarded for their savings. They're supposed to see the interest that they earn on their savings account go up. If you're looking in the right place, it is the best you've seen since 2009. If you're just standing at the same place you've always had your savings, it probably doesn't look a whole lot different than 2021. The problem is, a lot of us are just a little bit lazy and, oh yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and raise my hand right here. At least I'm in a high yield savings account, but I'm not out there switching my account trying to capture the highest interest rate available. It probably takes about 20 minutes, but most of us aren't doing it. The thing is, it's just a little bit of a hassle. It's not hard, it's just annoying. So most of us aren't doing it. So banks don't really have an incentive to raise interest rates because most of their customers aren't giving them an incentive to do so. We aren't picking up our pocketbooks and heading to the bank across the street or a new bank online. If we were, we would be giving banks an incentive to raise their rates. But instead, most of us are sitting kind of complacent and accepting these less than stellar interest rates. And again, I say this knowing full well that I am a part of this group. And it's not just our touch of laziness to blame. There's another side to this problem. And quite frankly, right now, banks don't need our money. When banks want to attract customers, often they do so with alluring interest rates. But when the pandemic hit, Americans beefed up their savings. Savings rates hit all-time record highs, and now 2 years out, many people still have a pretty good cash cushion. As I showed in that previous video, Americans currently have record levels of cash on hand. And what do banks do with this cash? They turn around and fund their lending practices with these deposits. With inflation sitting at 40-year highs and interest rates on lending activities increasing, there's been a pretty steep drop in demand for borrowing activity. So with these excess cash reserves and a lesser demand for loans, banks have more than enough cash on hand to finance their lending activities. So quite frankly, they don't need to attract new customers. So that's just another reason banks aren't rushing to increase their interest rates. But there's actually even more to the story. The Fed has taken actions to make it so banks have less of a need for your money. When the pandemic first hit and those stimulus checks were rolling out, the Fed declared that the reserve requirements ratio would be lowered to 0%. To quote the Federal Reserve, this action eliminated reserve requirements for all depository institutions. Prior to that, reserve requirements sat around 10%. To break down our reserve requirement, let's say a bank has $1 million and a reserve requirement of 10%. That would mean they would have to have at least $100,000 in reserves at all times, and they could loan out $900,000. However, with a 0% reserve requirement, the bank can legally loan out the entire $1 million and keep $0 in reserves. Now, why have reserve requirements in the first place? Simple, just to meet the demands of customers wanting to make a withdrawal. And bear in mind that reserve requirements are a tool that the Fed uses to influence monetary policy. When they want to push money out in the economy, they can lower reserve requirements, making it easier for banks to lend money. If they want to tighten up monetary policy, they can increase reserve requirements, making it harder for banks to lend out money. Unfortunately, the Fed hasn't announced any changes to the reserve requirement ratio, and I feel like they should. A low or no reserve requirement ratio is geared more towards quantitative easing. And as we can tell, the Fed is trying to engage in quantitative tightening. They've been so aggressive with raising interest rates. Why not also address the reserve ratio? After all, if they were to increase those reserve ratios, banks might then have the incentive to increase the interest rate on savings accounts because they might have a need to lure in new customers with their deposit money. I get that increasing the interest rate on lending activities is overall more impactful to the economy, but why not address the reserve ratio? Why not help out those of us who are saving and allow the interest rate on savings accounts to come up just a little? Why not help those of us who are watching inflation eat away at our purchasing power? Just a little bit, you know? Banking is literally the most profitable industry in the US. How they make their money is by taking their customer savings and lending it out. Right now, their profit margins are incredibly high. Mortgage rates are over 6%. Car loans range anywhere from 3 to almost 9% depending on your credit score. Then they can turn around and pay you a fraction of 1% on your savings account. Of course, they're not rushing to increase the interest rate on their savings account. Keeping that interest rate low allows them to keep their profit margins as high as possible. I really like the phrase, when you know better, do better. So now that I know that me being just a little bit lazy and not switching up my savings account, chasing that higher interest rate is helping banks keep the upper hand and keep their interest rates low, will I switch my account? I don't know. Maybe. I probably should. I probably won't, if I'm being honest. At least I'm already in a high yield savings account, so I figure it's probably good enough. So if you don't want to switch your account, trust me, I get it. But to the 79% of American adults who are utilizing just a traditional savings account as opposed to a high yield savings account, I do think that would be a good switch to make. After all, high yield savings accounts pay interest that is 20 to 25 times higher than a traditional savings account. So it does seem like a no-brainer. High-yield savings accounts are traditionally only offered by online banks or credit unions. Traditional banks with brick-and-mortar branches have higher operating costs and generally can't compete with these streamlined operations. So if you aren't using a high-yield savings account, I do think now is the time to switch to that. I know switching is a hassle, but this one is worthwhile, at least in my opinion. What do you guys think? Do you use a high-yield savings account? Let me know in a comment down below. I post new videos every single week. If you got anything at all out of this one, please give it a like. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, or if you know of someone who might get something out of this type of content, please consider sharing. Bye.